Let's go to John, the 4th chapter, and see what Jesus, the Messiah, tells this Samaritan woman, or tells this stranger. Let's see. It is in John, the 4th chapter, and 20th or 19th verse. It reads, "The woman said unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet." The Lord had told her some things about herself. Verse 20. She goes on to say, "Our fathers worshipped in this mountain. And ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." Now, her father, she's talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because this Samaritan, who is not an Israelite, is not of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. She has been in the land so long, because she was one of the populations that was put there after some of the Israelites left in 722 AD. And they were displaced by the Assyrians, and another nation was put in that place. She and her ancestors had been there so long, she had took on the customs and the traditions and some of the religious practice of the Israelites. But Israelites didn't have anything to do with her. Okay, that's why she even made the comment about that. Okay, but listen to this. Listen to what Jesus tells her. Jesus saith unto her, "Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain, nor yet at Jerusalem, worship the Father." He says in 22, "Ye worship ye know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews." So if one wants to be saved, that is a German. If one wants to be saved, that is a France. If one that is Spanish wants God, they have to do what the Jew did. They have to keep the laws, the statutes, and the commandments of God. They have to have faith in Jesus, not to establish something else, as the Roman Catholic Church has done. There is no salvation in the Roman Catholic Church. There is no salvation any other way. You have to do what was given to Israel. That's the bottom line. Jesus himself, the one that many Christians claim to follow, says, "Ye worship, ye know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews." Now it is understandable that this can be misunderstood, and many will take this and run with it. They take this and they take what Jesus said when he said, "I am sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." They take that and run with it, but what they don't understand is that, hey, he made all nations. And when he said he was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel, it goes back to the protocol that I mentioned earlier, that the message has to go through Israel, and he came to repair spiritually Israel. So he came to fix them up in the right way so they could go and take that message out to the rest of the world, into Asia Minor, into Europe, so that the gospel could be preached and so that people of all nations could be saved. But what were the disciples preaching? What were the apostles preaching? What was Paul preaching? Hey, they preached the laws, the statutes, and the commandments, and faith in Jesus Christ. This is what they preach. Obedience to God and faith in him so that one can be justified. But let's move on. Let's go to Exodus, the 12th chapter. Because many, again, they misunderstand. They take a scripture, they take a verse, and do not read in totality, and therefore miss the message that the Almighty is trying to give. This is in Exodus, the 12th chapter. I want to read, we started off in Exodus, the 19th chapter, and we read about when Israel came into the wilderness. We want to read about who else came with Israel, because they were not alone. Exodus, the 12th chapter, and the 37th verse reads as follows. "And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot, that were men beside children." So you had multitudes and multitudes of Israelites that came out of Egypt. None stayed. They were hasted out. Verse 38. Let's find out who else came with them. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, even very much cattle. What mixed multitude? Hey, other nations came with Israel. And you read about how they became a part of that congregation of Israel. Egyptians, some of the Egyptians came with Israel. Some people that were of other nations in Egypt who saw that Israel's God was the true and living God, came with them, traveled with them through the Red Sea, traveled with them into the wilderness, became a part of that congregation. Let's go to Numbers, the 15th chapter. Numbers the 15th chapter. Because it was always God's intention to bring all men into this Commonwealth of Israel. Salvation is of the Jews. So if you want salvation, you got to come this way. But again, this does not mean that other nations will not be saved. If that was the case, why did he have other nations come with Israel out of Egypt? A mixed multitude came with Israel. We're going to read about something else. See, if God was that small, he wouldn't have did this right here. Numbers 15 and the 14th verse. And if a stranger should join with you, or whosoever be among you in your generations, and will offer an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto the Lord, as ye do, so he shall do. So back in those days when they were supposed to keep a sacrifice, before the ultimate sacrifice, Jesus came. Before he came, they offered up animals. And he said, hey, as Israel does, so should the stranger that sojourns among you. Verse 15, one ordinance shall be both for you of the congregation, and also for the stranger that sojourneth with you. An ordinance forever in your generations, as ye are, so shall the stranger be before the Lord. One law and one manner shall be for you and for the stranger that sojourneth among you. Jew and Gentile, Israelite and stranger, all keeping the same law. God is not that small. God created us all. How can one say that only Israelites will be saved? When we see a mixed multitude follows Israel, went with Israel into the wilderness, we see how laws were the same for the stranger and for Israel that sojourned with each other. So how can one say that only the Jew is to be saved? Let's go to Ephesians, the 2nd chapter and the 11th verse. Because this is Paul preaching to these strangers here. He says, wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hands. So he's saying, hey, you Gentiles, or these are Europeans, he says, who are called uncircumcision because it was not their practice to be circumcised. He said, you were called uncircumcised by those of the circumcision, or those Israelites. Okay? It says that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. Now what does this mean? It's simply saying, Paul is simply saying that, hey, before Christ, before this time, you were aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers in the covenants of promise, and you had no hope, and you didn't have God in the world. Okay? But I will say this, because we're going to read it in another place where it talks about how, hey, if you would do righteousness, if the righteousness that you do is contained in the law, hey, it's going to be seen by God. God is a righteous judge. So some have the question about what will happen to those who don't know God or don't know Jesus, strangers. Back in these times and even today, some have that same question. Well, God is a righteous judge. He judges the heart. Okay, and if one does those things contained in the law, if one is righteous to the best of their ability, hey, God will judge them accordingly. But let's go to Ephesians, the 2nd chapter and the, the 14th verse. 14th verse. Oh no, I'm going to skip down to the 19th verse. It says, now therefore ye are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow servants with the saints and of the household of God. Now he's talking to the stranger. He says, you are no more a stranger, no more a foreigner, but you are a fellow citizen with the saints of the household of God. Spiritual Israel, you have come into the commonwealth, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. You're built on something. You're built on the prophets and the apostles. You're built on Jesus Christ being the chief cornerstone. Let's go to Romans, the 2nd chapter. Romans, the 2nd chapter, and find out something about God in the 11th verse. For there is no respect of persons with God. Okay? God is not a